The name's Bond. James Bond.
Well, here we are. The summer is finally winding down. Bond 25 is officially in the rearview mirror. All the Daniel Craig films are out. It's officially closed down, so we can finally do our ranking of the Daniel Craig films. Now, say what you want about the Daniel Craig era. It was nothing if not bold. It was a totally new direction from what we were used to. Some people loved it, some people hated it. And we're going to talk about all the reasons why. Now, my list is definitely going to be a little weird. You know what my number one is going to be. It's not a secret. If you've watched this channel, if you know me at all, you know what my number one is going to be. What might be interesting, though, what's wrestling for bottom place and what's wrestling for the second place. That's where it's going to get interesting. So let's do it. Let's jump in. Let's talk about number 5. So here we are. What ended up in last place? Well, this one, it was a little bit of a wrestling match with another Bond film. In the end, I felt that it just didn't have the punch, didn't have the energy, doesn't have the things that I want in a James Bond film, and quite frankly, this story is so convoluted, it doesn't really work for me at all. I could forgive it if it had other things, but it is what it is. I scored this one a 2, so it's pretty far down there. Let's get into it. Spectre.
No.
So what can I say about Spectre that hasn't already been said? Some films try to do something spectacular, and they just kind of miss the mark. They fail at what they set out to do. With Spectre, that's not even really the problem. It's just that there's not much here. It's going through the motions, but nothing is really happening. It just kind of moves from one scene to the next. I'm not really understanding the stakes, so there's no real sense of urgency. None of the scenes really stand out, so the final product is this kind of murky mess. There are a few good things about the film. The opening is pretty cool with that continuous opening shot. Not a bad way to kick things off. I thought Hinks was a really good henchman. I really wanted to see more of him. Aside from that, I think that's all I've got. The rest of it just feels like a placeholder. Whose idea was it to make the whole film this yellow, washed-out sepia tone? Especially after coming off a film like Skyfall, with that spectacular cinematography and that rich palette. The action scenes are weirdly boring. The car chase is so bad, I almost have a hard time calling it a car chase. 2 cars following each other doesn't qualify as a car chase.
Hold that thought.
I mean, if you can stop and chit-chat during, then something's wrong. And I think the worst offender is the story. The story is almost non-existent. It just sort of picks up. It just kind of starts moving scenes, connecting scenes to the next one. I mean, James Bond is kind of putting a mystery together, I get that. Bond is sort of following steps. We're going from one clue to the next. But to what end? What are we preventing here? There's no overall coherent story that binds it all together. There's no ticking clock here. And the whole ending in London, this feels like an afterthought. Like they didn't know how to tie this film together. They didn't know what the climax would be. I mean, you would think Bond blowing up the Spectre lair, which, again, way too easy. But I mean, Bond blowing up the sinister organization should have been the finale. But the whole thing is just written wrong. The climaxes happen in the wrong place, the build-up is not there. What should have been the ending is happening 2/3 into the film, and then we get just an extended prologue. This whole thing with the villain capturing the girl, tying her up. I mean, this is so cliche. It's so uninspired. And I haven't even gotten to the actual villain yet. I mean, this was such a bad move. I don't even want to talk about it too much because I know we've exhausted this point. But whoever decided to make Bond and Blofeld brothers, I mean, somebody should have been fired. And the whole thing about Daddy loved you better, so I killed Daddy and just spent my life torturing you, none of it makes any sense at all. Oh, and by the way,
the man you're talking to now, the man inside your head, is Ernst Stafford Blofeld.
Catchy name.
What was the point of making Blofeld a big surprise like this was some plot twist? When you call the movie Spectre, anyone who knows what Spectre is knows that Blofeld is the leader of that organization. So how is that a twist in any way? I mean, believe it or not, I can still go on, but I think you get the point. A lot of fans really like Spectre, and I wish I could get on board. Some of them really think this was a return to classic James Bond. To me, maybe it's a return to some of the lamer elements, but as a film, it just doesn't work for me. So yeah, I scored this one a 2. It's not quite the bottom of the barrel, but it's pretty close. It's just a swing and a miss. So you know what number 4 is. Number 4, I scored this one a 3. Why does it nudge Spectre a little bit? Well, Spectre is sort of an experiment that fails, whereas this one kind of does hit the mark that it's shooting for, but it's not the mark that I want. There are a few things in here that I can't forgive too easily, so we'll talk about it. Again, I scored it a 3, Quantum of Solace.
Well, Tosca isn't for everyone.
Now, don't get me wrong, I knew that Casino Royale would be a very tough act to follow, but they were in such a rush to capitalize off the success of Casino Royale that they seemed to forget what made Casino so great. There was a word that we completely overused when talking about Quantum, and that word is gritty. Well, it's one thing to be gritty, but this film remembered only the dirt and grime and grit that was sort of introduced in Casino Royale, but completely forgot the elegance, those wonderful Bond moments that made it so special. So this film goes overboard to be dirty, but forgets to offset it with the beauty and glamour of James Bond. And no, one tuxedo scene is not going to cut it. Now, we all know there was a writer's strike going on, so the story, the dialogue was a little lost, and the film tries to compensate with a lot of style and action. And I admit, that's what it does well. The editing, of course, really bothers me. I've said it before, the first few times I saw this film, I thought maybe I just sat way too close to the screen. I could not follow what was going on. There were several scenes that I just could not figure out what was going on. I mean, you can't randomly over-edit these scenes to the point where you can't follow the action. It's like the harder I'm trying to get into this movie, the harder it's working to throw me off. And again, the story is lacking, and between the weak story and the really fast runtime, the whole film seems like a little asterisk in the column next to Casino Royale. It is the first sequel, and it feels like it. It feels like something that does not stand on its own. It's got some really good moments. The tiny little bit of downtime between Bond and Mathis really works. I really enjoy this scene, but again, why did they bring back Mathis only to bump him off 2 scenes later? It doesn't make sense. And what are they trying to prove with this utter disregard for this character? Again, going overboard for the sake of grit and grime doesn't work for me. So why did I place this one above Spectre? Well, again, this one I think is at least attempting to do something. I just don't like what they're attempting to do. Spectre to me falls short because it's lacking in energy. I can't say that's a problem with Quantum. It's got energy. So I think it does make it a much better watch than Spectre. But again, in terms of character, in terms of story, in terms of intrigue, in terms of moments of luxury and beauty that I want from James Bond, in terms of romance, it's just sadly lacking, and it doesn't have the things I want. It's got some interesting ideas, but it's just not enough, and the whole thing does feel really rushed. It was nice to have a sequel out in 2 years, but you know what? This is one case where I would have rather see them wait a little bit and get the script to where it needs to be to make the story work.
Bond, I need you back.
I never left.
So again, not a terrible film. I know it's had a resurgence in the last few years. A lot of people really enjoy it, and that's great, but it's never going to be really high on my list. So the competition is starting to heat up a little bit, and here's where you might be wondering where I'm going. There's only 3 left. So what ended up at number 3? This one was even a tougher wrestling match than the last 2. These 2 were very close. They were very neck and neck. You know which ones I'm talking about. One just kind of managed to, go ahead of the other one just a little bit for me personally. But this one is a very capable, very competent film. I scored this one an 8. Let's talk about it. Skyfall.
Everybody needs a hobby.
So what's yours?
Resurrection.
Now this was the return to form we were waiting for. After the rather disappointing Quantum, Skyfall was a giant leap forward in quality, yet it wasn't derivative of Casino Royale. It was sort of doing its own thing. It kind of found its own voice. It's got a great look, it's got a great sound, it really is unique, and it really works. Now Skyfall is not perfect. The story does rely an awful lot on the Dark Knight films. It's taking a lot of its cues from Christopher Nolan, and there's a lot of plot holes in the bad guy's plan. But once you look past that, this is a film you can easily lose yourself in. It starts out swinging, it's got a great pre-title sequence, probably one of the best in the series. Seeing Bond in a little bit of downtime is a lot of fun, and subsequently watching Bond get his groove back, it's really interesting stuff.
What did you say you did for a living?
Where the film really excels is the cinematography and the villain. Now, the cinematography is just incredible. This is a film that gets multiple viewings at my house, probably primarily because of the look of the film. This is one you just want to watch over and over because all the scenes look great. And the way each scene and location gets its own look, boy is that great. The bleakness of Scotland, the rich blues and greens of Shanghai, the red and yellow of Macau. I mean, it's all really working. And of course, you get the main villain, played by Javier Bardem.
To survive us. And then what? Do you kill them? No. You take them and release them into the trees. But now they don't eat coconut anymore. Now they only eat rat. You have changed their nature.
In my opinion, Bardem really steals the show. He is just great to watch. This guy could read the phone book and it would be interesting.
Regret is unprofessional.
Regret is unprofessional. They kept me for 5 months in a room with no air. They tortured me. And I protected your secrets. I protected you.
All of his monologues are just great to watch. This guy is really an actor. Now, I mentioned that the plot is a little weak. The villain's big escape to hatch out his plan, it doesn't hold up to a lot of scrutiny, but honestly, when you watch this, even in repeat viewings, you're kind of on the edge of your seat. I mean, they really made this work. And by the way, the score by Thomas Newman was really great. Now, I'll admit, I was really disappointed David Arnold didn't return, but once I heard Newman's score, I couldn't picture this movie any other way. Again, it's kind of its own animal. For that reason, it really works. So yeah, the whole thing is really a spectacular cocktail. The action is great, the supporting cast is spectacular, the look, the gorgeous cinematography works. I mean, it really gives a Bond fan a lot of what they want in a Bond film. So yeah, that's why I scored it an 8. It's definitely a top tier Bond film. It's just kind of hard to resist. Which means you know what has to be number 2. Again, you already know what my number 1 is. This one nudged out Skyfall only barely, because they have a lot of the same strengths. But and honestly, a lot of the hate that this movie got really made me second guess it and think maybe it doesn't deserve to be as high in my personal rankings as I think it is. I also scored this one an 8. So again, very close to Skyfall, but nudged out ahead because, again, it kind of gets me at a little bit more of a gut level. For me, the experiment works, and the bold ending didn't bother me as much as it bothered a lot of people. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. No Time to Die.
Why would I betray you?
We all have our secrets. You just didn't get to yours yet.
I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this one. Boy, this one is either you love it or you hate it. And I'm kind of surprised. I think more people hate it than love it.
So you're not dead?
Hello, Q. I've missed you.
Let me start by saying this. This film grabbed me really early on. I thought the whole pre-title sequence was great. Already, it had a really great look. The cinematography was not quite as obvious as in Skyfall, but boy, did it seem like every scene was bathed in the purple and golds of a sunset. The action is spectacular, and I was really buying the intrigue. The acting is great here. I was hooked kind of early, and I think by the time you got to the scenes in Jamaica, when Bond steps off the boat, fish in one hand and the harpoon gun in the other. That was it. So I have a theory about why this scene really hooked me right from the beginning. You know how it's been said that Ian Fleming used to write kind of a perfected version of himself? I feel like that's exactly what's happening here. This to me is the perfected version of Fleming. Like, this is how Fleming saw himself. This is how he would spend his time if he was in a similar situation. So yeah, all of this stuff really worked. So even as things moved on, I was kind of already sold. Now, let me concede a few points. First off, yes, the bad guy, the villain, the plot doesn't really work.
We both eradicate people to make the world a better place. I just want to be a little tidier.
Rami Malek is really kind of wasted in this part. He's trying his best to be spooky, but again, there's no real motivation here. I don't understand what he's all about. I mean, the nanobots doesn't really relate to the garden. It's perfectly fine to want to sell a high-tech weapon to rogue governments for a lot of money, but the pontificating about mankind and trying to clean things up, it just falls short. You can tell a lot of the story got changed around, a lot of rewrites, last-minute changes, and who knows why that happened, but we can't speculate. We can only judge the final product. So yes, in that respect, it falls short, but again, there's too many things in here that work so well for me. So before I go back to gushing, let me back up a little bit, because I totally acknowledge that No Time to Die really pushes the boundaries of what we expect from a James Bond film. But I think there's good reason for that. For one thing, the whole Daniel Craig era was an experiment all on its own. I mean, Casino Royale was the first reboot. It was the first time they ever announced an official reboot of the series, and I admit, I was a little skeptical. But once I was on board with that, once I saw what they were doing with Casino Royale, that's it, I was hooked. And quite frankly, I have a theory that GoldenEye was really an unspoken reboot, we just don't talk about it. So this wasn't totally uncharted territory, but that's for another day. Yes, this was an official reboot. So all that was going to come from the Daniel Craig era was, in a lot of ways, this alternate universe James Bond. So again, that made me much more open to different things. And the other big part of this is, when we got to the end of Spectre, they really painted themselves into a corner. Once we got to Bond 25, the fifth Daniel Craig film, it was way too late in the game to just do a standalone adventure. They really did have to kind of bring the Craig era to a close. And because of where we'd been so far, no matter what we did, it was going to be a little clumsy. So I was really rooting for this film to really tie things together in a way that made sense. So I already went into this film with a lot of goodwill. And once it started, once it kicked off, I got a lot of what I like really quick. I already mentioned the pre-titles, it drew me in fast. I loved seeing Bond in a little downtime, a very underrated aspect of James Bond. We saw Bond after he went off to the sunset with his lady, and then we saw James Bond with his free time, what he would do totally solo, going off the grid. I mentioned the cinematography. The cinematography in this film is spectacular, very on par with Skyfall. The action scenes are all solid. The DB5 scene, probably the best DB5 scene I think we've ever gotten, quite frankly. The shootout in Norway was great, very well done, very moody, really works. The gunfight in the hallway and the climax was spectacular. I loved seeing Felix back. The scene with Bond and Felix together, having a good time, great stuff. And I thought the death of Felix Leiter was very well handled. A stark contrast, by the way, to the death of Mathis in Quantum, which I already talked about. They treated Leiter with the gravitas and respect he deserved. And yes, killing off Leiter was a pretty bold move. Something that I think I would only tolerate in sort of the final film of this era. I love how Bond handled it. I love how Bond reacts. And of course, there's one part that even the worst haters of No Time to Die all love. It's the Cuba scenes.
3 weeks training?
Really?
More or less.
Still gonna need that car. Salute.
Salud.
Great action, some signature Bond moments that I think will stay with us forever. And of course, Paloma is an incredible Bond girl. Boy, does she just hit it out of the park. I mean, nobody's got a problem with this scene. And of course, is the elephant in the room. Now let me back up just a second. Bringing the Bond girl back for another adventure is uncharted territory. We've never done it before. But again, if you're gonna close off the Craig era in a way that makes sense, I think it works. Bringing her back for this one for me made a lot of sense. And frankly, I was more convinced that Bond was in love with this woman in the first 5 minutes of this film than all of Spectre was able to do. Bond having a child. Again, something that can only possibly work in the final film of a Bond actor's tenure. It would only work if you accept the fact that this is an experiment unto its own. But I kind of liked it. I thought the dynamic worked pretty well. She was a great little actress, so I was okay with this. And then, of course, the big ending. I can totally understand why a lot of Bond fans would just call this sacrilege. But again, I was okay with it. I think this era really needed to end with a sense of closure. And I think without this, you wouldn't have had that. Just having Bond go off into the sunset for a 5th time, I don't know if that would work for the end of the Craig experiment. I agree that the story points should have been polished a little bit better, but like I said, I was just okay with this. Would I want to see it in the next Bond incarnation, the next film? No, of course not. But again, simply closing off the Craig experiment, to me, it just made sense. We saw the beginning of James Bond, we saw the end of James Bond, and the next incarnation of James Bond will be different, and maybe a return to form, a return to what a lot of Bond fans are hoping for. So I think I've kind of exhausted why I like this film as much as I do, why it's so high in my ranking. Again, it's not a perfect film, but when I think of it in terms of the sum of its parts, I think there are too many great things in this film that work for me really well that really overshadow the few things that don't work. It's not a film that's going to be remembered for its incredible story and plot, but there's a lot of so good character moments in here, gorgeous looking moments, emotional moments. It just gets me on a gut level, and that's why it's my number 2. Which brings us to number 1, and again, not just my favorite Craig, but probably my favorite James Bond film of all time. This one, for many, many years, I said to myself, I can't let a newbie be my new all-time favorite James Bond film. I've got to let one of the classics from the 60s hold that spot. But if I'm honest with myself, I think this one just does it perfectly. It just hits every mark. I mean, the planets just completely aligned for this film. Everything worked. And I kind of wonder if we'll ever get something with this level of perfection and magnificence again. Am I gushing too hard? Maybe, I don't know. Let's get into it. I scored this one a 10, no shocker. It is quite literally the quintessential perfect James Bond film. If I had a friend who'd never seen a James Bond film before, doesn't understand all the excitement, I would show them this film. And quite frankly, if you still don't understand why James Bond is so great, that's all I got for you. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. It's gonna be a gush fest. Casino Royale.
So as charming as you are, Mr. Bond, I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed house.
You noticed.
Okay, if you know me, if you know being James Bond, then you know that I gush over this film. This film just got me from the first night I saw it. It probably got me from the trailer. I remember the first time I saw the trailer for this film and thinking, I think they're onto something here. And when I saw it in the theater, I was absolutely blown away. I'll just say it, I think this is quite literally the perfect James Bond film. Everything about this film, this story, it just works. All the planets just lined up perfectly. First off, you had the first Ian Fleming novel, which had never been properly put to film, at least not an official Eon production. So the fact that they were actually doing Casino Royale on the big screen was already really exciting. The fact that they did the book the way it's written, they didn't just take elements from the film, pay it a little lip service, move on to a more grand plot with world domination and satellites or whatever. The fact that the crux of the story is the same as in the novel, I mean, that's just gold. The characters from the book, finally seeing Vesper and Mathis was spectacular. I'll just say it, Daniel Craig made a spectacular James Bond. I wasn't sure what they were going for with this incarnation. He did look a little different than we were used to. Not the traditional handsome, good-looking guy, kind of rough around the edges, but he was so convincing. He made sense as a new, tougher James Bond. I love the level of realism in this film, and specifically, I love how they take the tropes and just sort of turn them upside down.
Vodka martini. Shaken or stirred?
Do I look like I give a damn?
They take a lot of classic Bond tropes and kind of look at them through a different lens. This movie in a lot of ways was meant to be sort of an origin story, a reintroduction to James Bond. So for people who weren't familiar with James Bond, this was a great way to meet him, and to meet the elements of Bond, the cocktails, the quips, all that good stuff. They kind of introduce all those elements, but again, in a different sort of way, a way that makes sense. For example, throughout Roger Moore's tenure, Bond always having beautiful women around was just sort of taken for granted. Here, you're introduced to the idea of Bond seducing beautiful women to get the information he needs to accomplish his mission. So it really makes sense. I think more than anything else, this film allows us to really walk in Bond's footsteps, more than any film before. There's even little subtle moments where you're sort of doing the detective work with Bond. You get some classic elements from the novel, elements I never thought I would see on screen. You get some lines that are right from the book.
Job's done. The bitch is dead.
I mean, my inner Fleming fanatic was just going crazy for this film.
Dry martini.
Oui, monsieur.
Wait. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quinoa lily. Shake it over ice and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
And again, it's got that great balance of realism, but still in this luxurious world that James Bond inhabits. I mean, having been such a fan of this novel over the years, I was just overjoyed to see the proper treatment, the proper respect given to the source material.
You're not going to let me in there, are you? You've got your armor back on. How's that?
I have no armor left. You stripped it from me. Whatever is left of me. Whatever is left of me. Whatever I am, I'm yours.
It's so nice to see James Bond in a real relationship where he is emotionally invested. I mean, honestly, I think we've only seen this once before. And here, it works. We're taken along on this journey. We've been part of this relationship from the time they met. So, like I said, not only do I think this is the best Daniel Craig James Bond film, I think this is easily the best James Bond film of all time. It's so perfectly made. All the elements are there and in the right proportions. The story is excellent. It's a gorgeous looking film. I mean, I don't think this is just a great James Bond film. I think this is a fantastic film in general. This is one I would be proud to show anyone, to introduce them to the world of James Bond. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences where everything just falls into place. It is the perfect James Bond film, and I am very proud to call it my favorite Bond film. And there you go. There is the ranking of the Daniel Craig films. Again, an era that a lot of people wrestle with, or maybe I shouldn't even say it that way, because I think a lot of people either clearly like it or they clearly don't. A lot of people really don't like what this era has become. I kind of harken back, again, take yourself back to 2004, 2005, when films were starting to get a little more realistic, Jason Bourne, Batman Begins, and people were starting to say, hey, you know what, we don't want silly over-the-top nonsense. Let's look at this character in a different light, and that's exactly what this era was. So for me, it's a win. Is it perfect? Does it outrank the originals from Sean Connery? No, I wouldn't say that. That's not the point. They changed the series up, tried different things, and in that respect, I think it really works. It gives me something that I can really sink my teeth into, really enjoy. It's been a great ride, and now it'll be interesting to see what's coming down the pike. How do you top this? But now that I've ranked all of the actors, what's left? Well, obviously we have to rank all 25 films. Again, a lot of the other content creators have already done this, so I thought it was sort of overdue, and I'm ready to do it. So we're gonna rank all 25 films. That's coming down the pike. That'll be a big one. So and it'll be a lot of fun to do. So guys, thank you as always. This is your good buddy head of section at Being James Bond. Please hit that like and subscribe button, all that good stuff, and I will see you again pretty soon with a ranking of all 25 films. Talk to you soon.